And then welcome everybody for coming here tonight. That's really lovely to be able to see you all. And thank you to Dr. Harriet Axbey, who's going to be talking to us about going to university, surviving and thriving there. Um, just a little bit about Autistic Girls Network, in case you don't know us very well. We are a small, tiny, in fact, charity that supports autistic girls and women and their families and campaigns for earlier diagnosis because girls are diagnosed on average 6 years later than boys, and that delay causes a lot of mental health issues. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Harriet. I'm going to let her introduce herself because she can do it much better than I can do it. And if you would like to put whereabouts you are in the chat, where you're joining us from, that would be great. And if these questions occur to you throughout the presentation that Harriet's going to give us now, do feel free to put them in the chat. That's absolutely fine. We are going to take Q&As at the end. Okay, thanks, Harriet.
Thank you. Thank you for all joining tonight. As Kathy said, I'm aware that there are some men kicking a ball about tonight. So thank you for taking the time to join today. I am Harriet, and I'm joining you from a rainy little village in Durham. But as you can tell, I'm from around London myself, but moved up here for one of my many degrees as a perpetual student. I have recently released a book on being at university as an autistic person. And I am here today to sort of talk you through what that involves, what I've written about, and some sort of hints and tips that I've written about in there. This is the book. And I decided to write this about a year or two ago. And it's because I really found that there was a big gap in the market. I did tons of research before I started university, and I couldn't wait to begin. I had folders and I had all this information, but a lot of that I had to find myself, and I could have really done with a book like this myself. So this book is meant to be sort of dipped in and out of. It's not meant to be read cover to cover. Not everything will be relevant to everyone. It is primarily for autistic young people starting university for the first time, generally from college or from sixth form, and for their parents, carers, and educators. It's also mainly aimed at people that are moving away from home for the first time, but I hope that it can also be useful for people that are staying at home and also for mature students. I wrote this because I sort of experienced starting university as an autistic person from 3 different angles. So as an autistic person myself, as parent, and as educator. And I think it's really important to be able to have all those different angles to really sort of put everything together as a useful resource for young people. So I'm going to run through some key things. And the first thing that I think is really important is the deciding process. So a lot of university information out there is what to do once you've already decided. But actually deciding what, where, and when is also really important. I would always advise to firstly decide what degree you want to do before you start thinking about where. Obviously, there's some exceptions to this. If you're really keen on one particular university, then you might choose your degree second. But as university is primarily to get a degree, I think it's important to choose what you want to study first. Secondly, it's then to decide where you want to study that. As you can see from the illustration, this is done by my amazing illustrator, Jonathan. This is basically a mock-up of what I did when I was planning to go to university. I put a little pin where my house was. I worked out what was 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours drive. I used a compass and I drew circles to show how far that drive was away from my house. And then I plotted all of the universities that were, for me, I was going by one of the rankings. And then I looked at each of those universities. I wanted to be within 2 hours of my parents' house, and I wanted to do law. So I looked at all the different places and I sort of color coded them and I did all this different stuff. I then ended up doing primary education 6.5 hours away from my parents. So not everything always goes as you originally plan, but that's what I did to work out what and where. Another then thing to consider is when. A lot of people go directly into university study, which is what I did and what most people do. However, lots of people choose to take a gap year or to defer, especially I think if as an autistic person, you've experienced a lot of burnout due to GCSEs and then A-levels. A lot of people like to have that year to just sort of decompress in between their education, because it can be quite a lot after sort of 14 years of continuous education. Lots of people just want a little bit of a break. So the next thing to consider is, when you've sort of had a look at where you want to study, is open days. I think it's really important to attend open days if you can. If you're going to be going to university, it's really good to actually see that university in person. Lots of universities do virtual open days. These became popular, especially during the pandemic. They can be very fancy, with you have a little avatar and you go into different rooms and things like that. But I don't think that can really replace an in-person open day. If you're going to be attending university in person, I think it's really important to go if you can. In researching my book, I contacted 90 universities. 24 of them replied, some with some really interesting accommodations that they offer autistic people. And some of these included their open day accommodations. So open days themselves might seem quite overwhelming. Lots of people all at once, everyone trying to sell you their university. But as an autistic person, you can ask for reasonable adjustments at an open day. So that can include quiet rooms. You can have separate tours. So sometimes you'll have a tour of like 20 people, but you can have a tour with just one person showing you around, and you're the only person being shown around by that person. And that can really take the pressure off, especially if you want to ask lots of questions like I did. Another thing they sometimes offer are separate open days. So that's when you can go around on a day that isn't the open day, the big open day where everyone goes. My book also covers sort of the applying to university process. I won't go through that now, but there's a lot about sort of filling in your UCAS application. But really, for that, I would actually recommend the UCAS website, because they've got some really good resources and articles and things on how to apply. So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel in terms of that. So yeah, the next thing would be about getting ready for university, which is more than just packing. Again, a great illustration by Jonathan. There's lots to consider when getting ready for university, practically, physically, and emotionally. In terms of practically, we're looking at things like bank accounts, student finance, and disabled students allowance. And these are all things that you can sort of apply for and look at, and getting your head around the jargon, especially as an autistic person, can sometimes be really difficult. So all the things like overdraft and credit versus debit and things like that. And I think part of getting ready is coming to terms with all that, because you're going to be in charge of your finances sometimes for the first time. And it can be a bit overwhelming. So getting a plan to do with finance in advance is really important. For instance, when you get your student finance, you're going to be given several £1,000s at once sometimes, and you're going to be like, wow, look at me, I'm rich. But actually that money's got to last you quite a while. So working out what you're going to do with that money is really important. Are you going to give yourself sort of pocket money? So each week you're going to give yourself 50, 70 pounds, and that's what you have to spend that week. Or are you going to have that big lump sum in your account, and when it runs out, that's it? So having a plan, and if you're a parent or care or educator watching this, talking that through with a young person and helping them come up with their own plan is going to really help them when they go to university. Another thing is to consider accommodation, so where you're going to live. If you're living at home, then you're sorted. However, there's lots of different options for accommodation when you go to university. And again, getting your head around all this jargon is really important. In my book, I include a glossary because lots of things I'll talk about: halls and catered, non-catered, paired and shared rooms. And these all mean different things, and sometimes they mean different things at different universities. I'll talk about this a bit more, but as an autistic person, you can request certain accommodation. And these are obviously all things you can do to make yourself more comfortable and be able to look forward to going to university. Another thing to say about accommodation is make sure you read that contract before you sign it. It will be a really long document, but it's really worth reading that. I, for instance, got stuck with a fine after my second year because I'd stuck some posters on the wall and you're not allowed blue tack. So little things like that are really important to just try and get your head round. More emotionally, in terms of getting ready for university, this is going to be a massive transition. So thinking of ways that you can manage that transition is really important. In my book, I've got one of my contributors, Sophia, whose Senko did a really lovely thing when she was off to university, which was they went round and they took pictures of the school, of her favourite places, of her classrooms, and also her teachers wrote letters, and they put them all together in an album, and then she took that with her to university. So it reminded her of her favourite places, things she'd done, and also of like the people that were important to her at school. And it's sort of little transition things like this that can make the big change not so scary. And in terms of physically getting ready for university, I'm a big advocate for making sure that you're physically healthy. So making sure that you're up to date with all your vaccinations, in particular the HPV and meningitis jabs are ones that are offered to young people. These are really important to get before you go to university. I've got a checklist for sort of the signs and symptoms of meningitis, which I think are really important for everyone to know, especially people at university. Something young people can do is they can request their vaccination record from their GP. And this will show them what vaccinations they maybe need topping up or that they've missed. Certain rates of certain things are rising, especially among university students, and it's just really important that everyone's protected, and that's part of getting ready for university. And then, of course, what to pack. So once we've sort of got ready in terms of the emotional side of things and the practical side of things, what to actually pack for university. You can find lots of lists online. What I've also included is a list of what not to pack. For instance, I see lots of people arrive at university with an ironing board. To date, I have never seen a student ever use an ironing board. So I wouldn't bother packing that. Some people think more is better, but actually, especially as an autistic person, I can get overwhelmed by having too much stuff. So sometimes it's best to think, if I'm not sure if I need that, maybe I'll just wait. And then I can go back and get it, or I can order something. I don't need to buy everything immediately. It also means you've got less to unpack. So arriving at university. So we've applied, we've prepared, and now it's time to arrive. One thing that I recommend for every autistic person to do is to ask if they can arrive early. This is an accommodation that is quite easy for universities to accommodate. And this is because most universities have 2 move-in dates anyway. They have one for international students and they have one for home students. So it's not too much bother for universities to allow autistic students to arrive with the international students. And this is normally about 2 days before everyone else arrives. Some universities already have this in place and will automatically invite anyone who has said that they're autistic to arrive early, whereas with others, you might need to request this yourself. But I really recommend this. I did this myself, and it just gives you that extra time to settle in before everyone else comes, and you've got a full car park with people unloading suitcases. And then also you get the best pick of the cupboards in the kitchen, and you can also show people where things are. But it allows you just that little bit of extra time to go to the library, take out any textbooks that are going to be in demand, because everyone's going to want that one textbook, and just get your bearings. And yeah, even if someone hasn't told you about this, contact your university and see if it's possible. Worst they can say is no, but they're very unlikely to. Most universities that I contacted said that it was something that they would accommodate. Another thing that's really important, as soon as possible after you arrive, is to register with a GP. Lots of people don't think about this. They wait till they're ill and then they find out they're not registered. But register with a GP as soon as possible, and then also you know where to get your prescriptions if you have them. Something to consider when you arrive is the dreaded freshers flu. There's lots of, in popular culture about freshers flu and getting the sniffles, but it's a lot more than that. It can be quite debilitating, especially when you're just settled in. So it's good to remember to keep your immune system boosted and just be prepared for maybe being a little under the weather. In my book, I also cover some sort of firsts in terms of arriving at university. So your first lecture, the sort of etiquette around that, first trip to the laundry room, and first trip to the library, things like that, that'll all seem very brand new, but after 3 years, you'll be second nature. So once you've arrived at university, it's really important to look after yourself. And this is obviously to do with physically, but also to do with your mental health and how to keep on track of things like that. So the first thing that comes to mind is food. Now, the student diet gets a lot of, jokes, but after the first couple of times of having cake for dinner for the first time for a week, you actually start to think, maybe I should be eating healthily. And that's where it is useful before you start university to really have a couple of meals in your repertoire. And they can be really easy things. I always think carbonara, super easy. You just need spaghetti and eggs, really. But they're just little things that you can make that are just a bit more healthy than, like I said, eating a cod and the caterpillar for dinner, nice as that is. And then there's keeping fit, exercise. And that doesn't mean you have to be on the treadmill every day. I'm certainly not. But even if your university is quite small and you don't get out very much, it's important to stretch your legs, get some fresh air, things like that. And I know you hear this all the time. Everyone, says, or, eat fresh fruit and veg and get some exercise. And we all go, yeah, sure, whatever. But it is really important when you're starting a new place and you're adjusting to make sure that you're still keeping track of your physical and mental well-being. Also in your physical well-being is sort of, as part of my current research, but period health and keeping on track of your menstrual cycle, making sure that you're, healthy in all ways, really. In terms of mental health, knowing what good mental health looks like for yourself can sometimes be difficult for autistic people. Sometimes autistic people struggle with knowing how they're feeling and thinking. So knowing what is healthy for you and then being able to recognize when things aren't so good is really important. And if you go, oh, well, I know I'm not feeling so good if I start missing meals, or if I don't sleep so well, or if I start sleeping more, recognizing those signs of what good and bad mental health looks like means that you'll be better able to recognize when things start going south. In terms of mental health, burnout signs are also really important to be able to recognise. Autistic burnout is a really big problem for our community, and being able to recognise when we're starting to feel burnt out and be able to stop it in its tracks before it happens is a really important thing to be able to do. And it can take some practice. Not everyone's great at it, especially when they're feeling burnt out, but to be able to recognise ourselves when we don't feel so good is a really good thing to be able to recognise. And being able to know where to get support for these things. So there's lots of different places that someone can get support. It might often feel like you're on your own, but there's always somewhere that you can go to for support. And I've got a list of resources in the book for that. In terms of looking after yourself, reasonable adjustments are something that you can ask for. I often say that there's no such thing as an unreasonable adjustment. And this is because anything that you need to be able to survive and thrive at university is not unreasonable. I am yet to hear of an adjustment that someone wants that is unreasonable. And lots of people say, oh, I don't need anything different. I don't need anything. But often when you see a list of reasonable adjustments, that's when a lot of people realise, oh, that could be useful. Oh, yeah, actually, that would really help me. So it's really worth sitting down and having a think, what will help me to be able to feel looked after and to look after myself while I'm at university? So staying safe at university. There's lots of different ways that we feel safe and that we can be safe. And this isn't all about physical safety. Obviously, locking doors and keeping windows closed is important. But it's also important to stay safe in other ways, and that's protecting your mental and physical health. I talk a lot about consent, and that's a really important thing to really have a good understanding of, both as a university student and also anyone that is supporting university students. And consent is much more than sex. Lots of people often think that consent is just about sex, but it's not. It's about everything to do with life. It's whether you give someone a hug, it's whether you share someone's picture, it's whether you get someone a drink. Consent is in every part of our lives, and it's really important to remember the foundations of consent. So knowing that consent must be reversible, so that's where you can change your mind at any time. It is informed, you understand what you're consenting to. So that's not just ticking the terms and conditions box, it's really reading what you are saying yes to. Must be within your capacity. Someone cannot consent if they're under the influence of drink or drugs. And consent must be freely given. So that must mean that you're not being coerced and that there are no negative consequences to saying no. An example of that would be hazing, which is less common in the UK as it is in the US. But these are sort of things like, to join the football team, you must do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not consenting because that is not freely given. And in the book, I give some examples of where consent was and wasn't given. And I ask the reader to have a think about each of the situations and whether consent was given. In terms of staying safe, it is important to think about sex before university. This is a time when a lot of people first come into contact with other people in that way. And it's important to have knowledge about sex and sexual activity before starting university. So if you're a parent or an educator, this is something to talk to all young people about. Regardless of whether that person goes on to have sex, they might pass on that information to someone else that can really help that other person. So it's really important to consider that. I've seen so many young people start university and not know how to put a condom on, for instance. So it's really important to have these conversations with young people so that they know for themselves and just to help their friends as well. Another way to stay safe is obviously talking about drugs and alcohol. Now, drug use is going down among young people, but that doesn't mean it's non-existent. And in the book, I don't say don't do drugs, although it would be great if no one did drugs. But I talk about the unpredictability of drugs and the way that with illegal drugs, you don't know what you're getting. And that's why it's really important, again, to be informed, and to inform young people so that they can make their own decisions. A really good website I direct people towards is Talk to Frank. And that is a sort of non-judgmental website that gives information on drugs, why people might take them, and their impacts. And I always give the example of drugs testing at festivals. When people have their drugs tested and they actually know what's in them, they actually mostly go on not to take those drugs. And this is why it's really important to be informed, because you're more likely to not do drugs if you are informed about drug taking. Alcohol is also a really big thing to talk to young people about. A lot of the time they've just turned 18, they can drink for the first time. So knowing sort of the facts about alcohol and alcohol usage is really important. Again, alcohol use is going down. University isn't the alcohol-fueled world that it used to be. A lot of young people don't drink at all, including quite a lot of autistic people. But it's important, again, to have these conversations and point towards the NHS guidance, for instance, that said there is no sort of safe alcohol amount. And it can affect someone's, obviously, capacity to consent and their capacity to make decisions in general. And again, another way of staying safe is to do with illness and keeping yourself safe from infection, and staying safe in that respect as well. So yeah, after you've started, how do you find the people that you want to hang out with, basically? For a lot of people, the first people that they come into contact with and they become friendly with are their flatmates, for people that are living in. And lots of people get very close very, very quickly to their flatmates. And this can be really great. They can bond really quickly. Lots of the time, those people end up being the people that they live with in second or third year of their undergrad. However, lots of people might feel that they don't actually get on with their flatmates, which is totally understandable. These are a random 6 or 7 people that have been plucked out of the university and put together with you. And it's okay if you don't create those bonds within the first week. It can take a while to find people you get on with, and it's important to sort of take your time and really sort of get to know the university and get to know yourself as a student, while making those bonds with other people. Something that lots of people often talk about is the idea of coming out as autistic. Many people are very open about their autistic identity. Some people might not be. I personally wasn't comfortable telling people I was autistic until I was at university, when I felt more able to open up about it. But it is, of course, someone's own choice whether or not they tell people. I find that it really helps in my friendships to talk about the fact I'm autistic, so they can sort of understand my worldview. And a lot of the time, if you come out as autistic, a lot of the time the person you're talking to will go, oh, me too. And it can really be a good bonding experience. But it is, of course, that person's decision whether or not they come out. There's lots of different ways to meet people at university. A lot of them will be obviously through where you live or your course. But some of the best places to meet people that you have similar interests with are clubs and societies. And the great thing about university is there's so many societies. There's a society for absolutely everything. Quite a few universities have a hummus society, for example. There's also societies for games, like werewolf or assassins. There's Quidditch societies. There's absolutely everything you can think of. And if there isn't a society you can think of, you can start one. And that's a really great place to meet people with similar interests. There's lots of different types of society at university. You'll hear a lot of jargon, for instance, JCRs. junior common room. This is just a group of people. It can be a group of people in the same flat, or if you're at a collegiate university, a group of people in the same college. There's also the student unions. And then within the student union, you also have even more societies. So there's so many places to meet people. And it's a really good chance to try out new things. At the Freshers' Fair, most societies and sports will have their own stall, and you can go up and sign up to their mailing lists. And if you're like me, never attend most of the people that you sign up for. There's also a good chance to sort of try out new sports. If you're like me and have absolutely no athletic ability, there's still a chance that you can play for a sports team at a much lower level than you might have done if you were, say, at school and they only choose the best 10 people in the year. We used to play, I was on the football team, and we lost every single game we ever played, except one time when the other team just didn't turn up. So we won that one by default. But we had fun, and I met some really good people there. So it's a really good chance to meet other people. Lots of universities also have societies for autistic people. For some of these, they won't be specifically autistic people. It might be the Disabled Students Association or something like that. But a lot of places will have an autism group or a neurodivergent group. And this is a really good place to meet people as well, because research shows that autistic people get on well with other autistic people. So you might find that your best peer support group ends up being with the other autistic people that you meet. So the reason that you're at university to get a degree. I can't remember who the quote is, but there's the quote of, "Don't let your degree get in the way of your education." I talked about a lot of university life that isn't the actual degree, so I think it's worth actually touching on the reason that you go to university, which is to get your degree. Like I said, this book isn't meant to be read from cover to cover, and a lot of the academic stuff is stuff that people might dip into. So one of the sort of things I think it's important to have is to decide some strategies before you start university. So for instance, what I did was I had a folder for each of my subjects, and I'd put all my notes for that subject into that folder. And then when it came to assignments or exams, I had everything in one place. And that was my way of doing it, and I decided that before I started university. So it's important to have a think about what strategies you want to do and be able to manage your own sort of strategies and deadlines yourself. Because you won't have teachers reminding you, you won't have your parents reminding you. You have to, for a lot of people for the first time, really take ownership of your own education, which can be great, but it's also a big step for a lot of people. So having a think about strategies for managing academia is really important. And there's also a lot of new ways of learning. For instance, referencing is a big step up for a lot of people. Lots of people might be doing degrees that don't need referencing, which is great. But for mine, referencing was the first time I ever had to do that at university. And learning about different types of software to be able to reference will give you that little bit of a step ahead when you start university. In terms of the way that you'll be assessed is also very different at university. For instance, for the first time, there'll be group projects for some people, which as an autistic person can be quite difficult. But remember that there are reasonable adjustments that can be made for these things. For instance, you might be able to give a presentation just in front of your lecturer instead of in front of your cohort. So there's lots of things that can be put in place to make things like that easier for you. Another thing to be aware of is plagiarism. I'll give my own example here. When I was in I can't remember what year it was now, but I'd completed an assignment, I'd handed it in. My friend was panicking about her assignment, and she said to me, "Oh, can I read yours?" And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And she was like, oh, what references did you use? And I sent them across. Fast forward a little bit of time, and suddenly I'm being spoken to, because what she had done was she had copy and pasted my reference list. And that had been picked up by the plagiarism. So even though she hadn't copied any of my actual essay, because her reference list was identical to mine, we could have got in a lot of trouble for that plagiarism. Luckily we didn't. It wasn't a sort of formal exam, but it's worth knowing what the definition of plagiarism, collusion, everything to do with that is. Something that's not included in my book, because it came out after I wrote it, is to do with AI. Now, AI can be a really great tool to help you in academia. I would recommend the website Goblin Tools. It can be really great at breaking down tasks for you. It also has a really good app where you can put in something someone said and you can judge the tone of it, which is really useful. Nothing to do with academia, it's just a really good app. Something else to consider is the academic opportunities at university. So this is things like placements, year abroad, internships, things like that. So these are all things that are opportunities to sort of have a think about. So what next after your degree? If, like me, you go into further study and you accidentally spend another 9 years at university and then go on to work at a university, that is one of your options. Or you might be like, absolutely no way, please let me leave. And you might start applying for a job. So I cover a little bit about applying for a job. It's quite similar to applying to university. You write a letter telling them how great you are. And there's a bit of information about support to do with that. I really recommend for everyone to apply to Access to Work. So it's a really good scheme, and you don't need a diagnosis for this. You just need to put in what your requirements are. Another thing that you'll come into contact with is things like occupational health. I was really worried about occupational health because I thought they were judging whether or not I would be allowed to work, whereas actually really they're just wanting to know what adjustments need to be in place for you to be able to be supported to work. Another thing is things like sabbatical roles, so you can stay at university even longer and work for, say, the Students' Union or for your college if you're at a collegiate university. So there's lots of different things to consider. Something a lot of autistic people do after university, again, if you can afford it, is to just take a little bit of a break. So a gap year, but after university. And again, this is quite common with autistic people that have experienced burnout after so many years of education. So it's something to consider. So advice for parents and carers. So for a lot of parents and carers, they can feel quite out of their depth. There's all this new jargon, especially if they themselves, when they applied for university, they didn't have an online system, they didn't use UCAS, or if they did, it was the old UCAS. So it's really important to familiarise yourself with the system. A lot of schools have seminars for parents, or you can just go on the UCAS website and have a bit of a browse. So familiarising yourself with the system to be able to know what your young person is talking about. Once they're at university, something that's really important is to be able to have plans. So when things maybe aren't going so great, they've got something to look forward to. So this can be a video call once a week, or saying, oh, we'll be up for a weekend in October or November, or just that you'll see them at Christmas and you've got a date that you'll see them. Having that point of contact is really important, because university can be a really insular place. It's bigger than a school, but it's still quite small. So remembering that there is an outside world and that any problems happening at university are still within the context of a much wider world will be really useful for your young person. Teaching them about finance, about consent, even how to cook, all really important skills to be able to have before university. Get them cooking twice a week before they start uni. They might find it annoying, but it will improve sort of their skills and you won't have to cook as much. So these are all useful things that you can do. Again, talking to them about friendships and relationships is really important. It's hard to say in a way that doesn't sound patronizing that as you get older, friendships make a bit more sense. I always put this in the context that the more you do something, so the more you experience something, the easier it gets. So the first time you break up with someone or the first time you lose a friend, it is really, really difficult. But as it happens more, it gets a little bit easier. And again, it's hard to say that sometimes, but it is important to give them your own experience and help them to realize that it is all within the context of a much wider world, and that there is more out there past university. And I've also included a bit in the book about what you might feel when they go to university, because I think saying goodbye, it's difficult. You're not really saying goodbye because they're going to be right there at the end of a phone and they're going to be back at Christmas. But it is hard. And I think it's especially hard when you consider how far they've come. And I think a lot of autistic people, they've experienced more barriers, more boundaries, more heartache, more difficulties than non-autistic people. And it's okay to acknowledge that you feel even more proud of them and even more upset at the thought of them going to university. And it's okay to feel all that. And I think a lot of people, they focus on the young person, but it's also important to think about your own feelings and how you feel at the thought of them going away. And sharing that with them is really important. Much like Sophia's Senko wrote them a letter, you can write them a letter, make them a photo album. They might think you're very uncool, but giving them that piece of home is really important. So yeah, I also include advice for educators. So I think it's important to educate yourself about autism in general. I think this is great for all teachers and university lecturers and everyone. There's a lot of misconceptions around that, especially as autism itself as a definition has changed so much over the years. For instance, Asperger's is obviously no longer a diagnosis, but even though it hasn't been a diagnosis since about 2015, there's still a lot of misconceptions around what autism is, what it means to be autistic. So just sort of educating yourself and those around you is really important. In school, helping with the transition is really important. This can be just talking about university. Again, visiting university is so important. My sixth form, there weren't many of us, so this was a bit easier, but we went to university in the first month of year 12. So that's S5, I believe, in Scotland. And it was really good. We went to Portsmouth, we stayed a night there. To just see what a university is like, experience a lecture, walk around. Visiting university as soon as possible really helps young people to be able to visualise themselves at university and to make that decision whether or not they want to go to university. Having peer support for young people in schools is really important. I really recommend Nest, which has been done by Edinburgh University. About sort of peer support in schools and how you can help facilitate that peer support. If you're an educator at university, allowing students to arrive early, really important. And also being able to put together support plans for young people and things like that. I often say that anything that supports autistic people will support everyone. And most things that you can do to support autistic people are free and easy. If you need to turn down the lights a little bit, if you need to reduce the volume of something, these aren't going to cost anything, but they can really make the difference and mean that everyone is able to access education. And again, I say, I am yet to hear of an unreasonable adjustment. If someone asks for something, it's because they need it to access education, and that should be respected. So in the book, I have a lot of lists. and I really love lists. But it's important to, think about what you need, what to pack, cooking essentials, what you need to buy on your first shop. Always remember toilet roll. If you're going to university, you might find that your ensuite doesn't have any toilet roll. That is the first thing I will say. Make sure that is packed. But also lists of, like I said, burnout, your symptoms of burnout, learning your signs of positive and negative mental health symptoms, and also just being able to plan for assignments and things like that. Cool. So yeah, I've probably spoken very fast, but I hope I've given you a bit of an overview about things that I think are helpful for university. This obviously won't cover everyone, and I haven't covered everything, but hopefully you found this useful. My book is available to buy. We'll put the link in the chat, but yeah, I'm interested to hear any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Harriet. That was fabulous. If anybody does have any questions, please put them in the chat, or put your hand up if you would like to share them verbally. That's absolutely fine. I do have a question actually, Harriet. So I have my own daughter is hopefully going to university in September. And I wondered if it might be a good idea to talk people through the DSA process so that they know. I know some people don't always know about it, so I think it's a good idea to let people know that it exists and like a rough idea of what might happen.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good thing to consider. It is obviously UK based, so if anyone's here not from the UK, then I am specifically talking about the UK one, but there might be variations in every country. So the DSA covers lots of different things. So it can cover physical things, and it can also cover support. So in terms of physical things, when you apply, and you can apply online, and when you apply, you can ask for things, for instance, common things that autistic people might need, physical items. For instance, could be a tablet that turns handwriting into text, or a laptop, or anything you need to be able to support your learning. Lots of people ask for printers and things like that. In terms of support, some people might want a support worker. For lots of people, this could be a scribe or someone to take notes for them in lectures, or it could be an autism-specific study skills tutor or therapist who specialises in autistic people. As part of, most universities will offer you about 6 counselling sessions a year, but as an autistic person, DSA can help pay for additional support. And yeah, you apply for DSA online, and you basically say what you would need. I always say more is more. The worst I can say is no. So ask for it and see what you can get.
Couldn't unmute myself then. It really is a kind of a different kind of benefit, isn't it, to something like PIP or Universal Credit, because when you have your DSA assessment, that the person who is assessing is actually going through all the information that you've sent them and saying, oh, actually this would be a really good idea, or this would be a really good idea, and it's a breath of fresh air compared to applying for other things. So yeah, that's a really good thing. And the tech that they've got now can be so useful, especially if you're dyslexic, for example. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in the chat. First one is, can you give me an example of how to plan for assignments?
Yeah, so firstly, mapping out all the dates. I'm a fan of a big calendar. I've got a massive wall planner here. So planning out the dates that assignments are due in, setting yourself deadlines. I can give you examples for essays. So the way that I planned my essays, I'd have the title at the top, then I'd break down into introduction, maybe 3 points, and a conclusion. And something I did was I went to the library and I got out every book on that topic, put them in a stack on my left. I'd go to the index of that book, look up my topic, write basically notes about what it said with the reference, and put it to the right. And I'd work my way down until I had no books left on the left and a massive pile on my right. Then when I was writing that assignment, once I had included that reference, I'd highlight it. And I'd keep going until I'd highlighted every single bit on the page. So that was my quite systematic way of working through it. But I think it is really important to have, to have the deadlines written down really clearly. I'm the sort of person that all my assignments would be in a month early. I think especially those ADHDs among us, having those self-prescribed deadlines is really important. So give yourself a week's leeway. And also remember, you can ask for extensions. You often don't need like a medical note to have a short extension. So if you do need that little bit of extra time, it's not going to count against you. And you can also submit adverse circumstances forms if you're having a difficult time at the time that you submitted that form, that assignment. It won't give you extra marks a lot of the time, but it sometimes will help you over grade boundaries. Say if you're on 59%, they might put you up to a 2-1, which is 60% and above.
And it's also something that a study skills mentor can help with, isn't it? That you get from DSA. So, for example, at the beginning of the term, going through all of your deadlines and making sure they don't all happen at the same time, and spreading them out a bit on your fantastic wall planner. That would be a really good idea. I'm going to go out and buy a wall planner now. So the next question is, can I be my daughter's nominated contact, meaning that I can liaise with the university disability department if she experiences difficulties? And if so, how and when does she do this?
So that will probably depend on the university. She would need to be the one to instigate that, and they'd have to make sure that obviously she was doing it of her own accord, because as you'll probably know, universities, they won't liaise with friends and family unless the young person themselves has given consent. So normally that would be after they started if they talk to someone, but again, it will depend on the university. So I'm hesitant to give an answer just in case
Yeah,
it's
I
different.
can answer this partially because I've just done it, because my daughter is starting university, and we contacted the disability department or whatever, it's be called different things in different universities, and we had to fill in a form, and that was actually one of the questions. So one of the questions was, do you want your parent to have sight of everything, or to be able to be contacted, so she could give her consent to that. So it might be worth contacting the disability department or whatever they're called in that university, and seeing whether you can do the same thing. Right, I'm sure there is another question. My daughter is likely to find it extremely difficult to walk into a room for the first time. Would support cover having someone to do that with her?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you ask for it, that is definitely something they can do. I would say, like I said, for my educators thing, that a lot of things don't cost any money. Something that could help would be the lecturer themselves meeting your daughter and going in with her. Or for instance, a buddying scheme or things like that with a student that's in the year above. But yeah, basically support can cover whatever it is you need. They might not necessarily say yes to everything, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask. But yeah, there's lots of ways that could be covered within adjustments that can be made between your daughter and the lecturer, or your daughter and the subject coordinator themselves.
Yeah, or perhaps even the disability team, somebody might come
Yeah,
and help
definitely.
out with that.
The disability teams are normally brilliant because they're full of people that spend their lives trying to make education accessible for people. So generally they tend to be really helpful. And yeah, if you do ever have any problems with them, there's always other departments as well.
And there's also the option, well, this really depends how far away the university is. But over the summer, you may be able to go with her a few times so that it's less traumatic and less scary, for her to do it herself. Obviously, if the university is like 4 hours away, then you're not going to be able to do that. But if it's closer to home, that might be a possibility as well.
Yeah, when I was a volunteer at the university, I would say that the summer is a great time to do all of that because we're just sort of sitting there twiddling our fingers. We had students who were autistic or students who were sort of physically disabled that would come and have a look around, work out their needs. Some people, we'd show them the room that they were going to be in, so they could sort of get their bearings. Or people could test out the ramps and things like that. So yeah, the summer is a really good time for that, before the influx of all the students, to sort of, yeah, test out what's happening. And yeah.
Yeah, and really good to be able to, find your bearings around getting to the library, getting to, wherever you're going to have most of your lectures from your accommodation, just having that extra time to, walk those walks. That's not a very
Yeah.
good sentence, but you know what I mean. It could be really, really useful. Next question, and probably the last question given the time. How do you get over the fear of asking for help or asking questions?
That's a hard one because, yeah, I guess time and experience. I wish there was an easy answer, but I think a lot for me, was getting over the idea that I was being an inconvenience. Um, and reminding myself that these people are here to help me get an education. It's literally their job. Um, a lot of people use obviously the financial model of I'm paying to be here, therefore I deserve this, which is again a way you can look at it. But I like to think of it as, yeah, these people, it's their full-time job is to help me access education, and it is their responsibility, and it is my right to be able to access the education that I am here to receive. And it can be difficult to ask for things, it really can. And I totally understand that. And I spent a lot of my life saying, I don't need any adjustments, I don't need anything. I'm normal. I don't need anything different from anyone else. But at the end of the day, if you do need something and you don't ask for it, the only person you're disadvantaging is yourself. So it's really important to think about what you need and to ask for it. But I totally understand that it is difficult and it might take a while. And yeah, it's just, yeah, important reminding yourself why you're there. And you're there to get a degree, and anything you can get to help you with that, and any questions you need to ask are totally okay and totally normal. And there is no such thing as a stupid question. I know everyone says that, but it's really true. And I ask a lot of questions now that I would have been too afraid to ask, when I first started university.
Yeah, and perhaps there's different formats that you can ask the questions in. It might be easier to ask it via email, for example, than it is to ask it face to face. I don't think that the person who asked this question is in the UK. If you were in the UK, this could be something that the study skills mentor could help you with, that you got through DSA. If you're in the US, I'm not sure. I know you don't have. I know from writing my own book that you don't have anything like DSA in the US, unfortunately. But there is a possibility that individual colleges, universities will have some kind of mentorship program or some kind of buddy program, and perhaps they might be able to help, possibly.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think, students in the year above you can be a really good source of information, because they might only be an academic year ahead of you, but somehow that can feel like an absolute wealth of information. And they can give you advice on accessing things, on assignments, on your degree, resources. So yeah, getting to know people that are doing the same as you, but slightly further ahead is also really important.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions, and we are almost out of time. So I am going to finish it there. Thank you, everybody who came along and decided that you wouldn't watch the football tonight. Presumably, we were much more exciting than any football. And thank you, Harriet, and thank you, Caitlin from Pavilion as well, for coming along and giving up your time and telling us such great information. If all of you that attended tonight have young people who are going off to university in September, or whenever it might be, then the very best of luck to you. And you can always ask questions in our Facebook group. That's absolutely no problem. Or I'm sure that you can find Harriet on her social media. That's at the bottom of her slides. And I'm sure she won't mind if you ask her the odd question either. And of course, you can go and buy her book, where it's going to have lots more information in it. Okay, well, thanks everybody. You can go and probably catch the rest of the football if you want to, if you're in the UK, not if you're in the US. And I will see you at our next webinar. Thank you. Bye.